Welcome to Beyond Names. I'm Dr. Habīb. This is a space for spiritual seekers and soulful misfits, for the curious and the committed, for those grounded in a tradition, and for those who are not sure what they believe. Whether you call the divine Allah, Yahweh, Elohim, Brahman, higher power, great mystery, spirit, or you're still searching for language that fits, you are welcome here. Together, we'll explore the intersection of spirituality and daily life, the wisdom of many traditions, and the ways we return to our true selves, to our source, to the light that you carry within. I'm so glad you're here. Let's begin with introducing our conversation partner for today. Reverend Dr. Aizaiah Yong is the Executive Director of the Collegeville Institute for Ecumenical and Cultural Research. Dr. Yong is an ordained Pentecostal minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, and with deep ties to the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. He has dedicated the past decade to holistic healing and social advocacy in collaboration with the queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Dr. Yong has been trained as a level 2 internal family systems practitioner and facilitator in the compassion practice, both of things which I resonate deeply with, given my time at Claremont School of Theology with Dr. Yong. Dr. Yong has also, in addition to scholarly journals, published 4 books: Multiracial Cosmotheandrism, A Practical Theology of Multiracial Experience; Sacred Parenthood, Spiritual Practices for the Highs and Lows of Parenting; The Pulse of Life, Exploring the Power of Compassion to Transform the World; and his most recent book, which we will hear an excerpt from today, Trauma and Renewal, Towards Spiritual, Communal, and Holistic Transformation. So, Reverend Dr. Isaiah, welcome to Beyond Names. Thank you for being here. It's so nice to connect with you after our many years of shared experience at Claremont School of Theology and the doctoral program there. So yeah, it's great to have you on. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Habīb. This is an absolute delight to be together again in this format and to be on a guest on your podcast, which I resonate with so much, and I'm really happy to be here.
Great. So you may not, well, I'm sure you don't know this because I never told you, but one of the things that really is like, you may not remember this, but we were in a practical theology class together. And what you don't know is probably about me is that I've had chronic health challenges most of my life. And so, and people who have chronic health challenges, as with everything in every circumstance, there's ups and downs and there's ups and downs. And I was really in a down point in dealing with my health stuff when we were in class together. And then you were this, like, you would come in and to class and you'd have your motorcycle helmet in one hand. And like when I saw you, like you just looked like the epitome of health. Like you looked, young and strong and healthy and fit and just, like sort of the opposite of what I was experiencing. Yeah. And then the however much time between when we were in that class together and I had that experience of witnessing you, obviously, not really knowing anything about you at that point. And then we were both fellows for spirituality and practice. And at the point that we were fellows, was after the motorcycle accident that you write about in your book, Trauma and Renewal. And so So then at that time, you probably remember this, you were in a wheelchair.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it had a profound impact on me,
Mm.
um, to be someone who struggles with health stuff, you know, and then witnesses or the world through that lens of
Hmm.
personal challenge, you know, and then seeing you in a moment of vulnerability, you know, in that journey of being um, of the vulnerability of recovering from a very traumatic accident. So,
Hmm.
so I just wanted to let you know, like that when I remember, like, I don't know whether it was carrying your backpack or pushing you in the wheelchair or whatever, but there was just there was something about that juxtaposition of the
Hmm.
experience of you in class and then the experience of you um, in having to rely on others for help.
Hmm.
So I
Wow.
yeah, I want to I want to unpack that a little bit, and I understand that the section of the book that you are going to read shortly is something that also will really resonate um, with my individual challenges. So, but before
Mm.
to that, before we get to you reading that passage, um, would you just introduce yourself by telling a little bit about your spiritual story and
Sure.
and telling us sort of what precedes um, you getting to trauma and renewal, and
Sure.
then maybe and then telling us a little bit about what motivated or inspired you to write trauma and renewal.
Hmm. Wow. Well, thank you, Dr. Habib, for sharing that story and both of just our initial encounters together, the ways our connection has evolved and changed in many iterations. And of course, when we met, also it was before it was the pre-COVID, realities of our
Yeah, yeah,
world. And so I don't know if the second encounter was either right before that, perhaps, or maybe probably I think right before 2020. But
yeah,
obviously, then that's another major transformation I think in our world. And I know experienced it personally in many of the communities that I'm part of. And we're all on this journey of ever never ending, seemingly,
yeah,
changes in our experience. And so, spiritually speaking, I come from a deep lineage of mystics and preachers and healers and artists and just amazing people of great courage and faith. I am a Chinese, Malaysian, Mexican American. And so my father was born in Malaysia and my mother's Mexican American. And they were the first in their families to partner with someone outside of their cultural identity. And so that experience was obviously profoundly transformative for them. Took a lot of faith and persistence to make that continue to come together. And my life is really a result in many ways of some of that story of bringing together what often the world attempts to separate and allowing the things that we might think are problematic or in conflict to be creatively enriching. And so I came onto the scene as the eldest child in this interracial partnership in an intercultural home in the context of the United States of America as a person of color. And so a lot of the ways I learn to move in the world are filtered through those experiences that I inherited, as well as kind of personally a deep curiosity for the spiritual life. I remember getting baptized into as a Protestant Christian around 8 years old. And they asked the pastor that was baptizing me at the time had asked me, like, what does this mean to you? And how do you understand what is happening to you in this moment? And I said, well, I just know that Jesus loves me and that I want to be in church every day.
yeah. That's great.
which is really strange because I don't actually remember necessarily how do I say this, enjoying church itself as a kid, but I remember feeling this yearning for the divine even at a
Mm,
very young age, and that was the only way I knew how to articulate to say I want to keep yearning in that way. I want to keep
yeah,
pursuing that, and this feels
yeah.
like part of what that is. And so so that was something that I think was always present. And the more that I've grown in my study and awareness of other traditions and paths and practices, I'm more and more connecting that initial impulse to this kind of monastic yearning deep in
Mm,
my soul that
mm,
really desired to kind of renounce everything else and give myself to the one thing that was really important. And so increasingly in my life, I didn't have a lot of language to kind of look at my life in that way, was
mm.
raised in a kind of Pentecostal evangelical setting. And so we didn't talk about monastics at all. And so I thought kind of the epitome of kind of the spiritual life was being a pastor, being a preacher, kind of leading a local community in that sense. And so I joined staff at a Pentecostal church in my late teen years while I was in the middle of college. And I did that for a number of years and really didn't find myself at home fully in that setting, and really felt estranged then from that experience spiritually, because in my upbringing, that was kind of the the climactic moment of the spiritual life and journey.
Mhm.
And so I ended up leaving that environment and did some nonprofit social change work with the Southern Baptists of all people, and did ministry in a primarily low income and immigrant context in Southern California with the Southern Baptists, and enjoyed that quite a bit. But actually, rather than kind of evangelizing, which was kind of the purpose of that group, to others, I felt I was deeply evangelized by the friends and the community members that I met there, not in
Mm,
terms of changing a religious orientation, but in terms of recognizing that there was a lot of goodness and beauty and love that seemed to be far more reaching and deep than some of the Christians that I knew. And
mm,
so I really, in that time, was asking serious questions about what that meant for what I perceived to be to the truth and how I would relate to it. And so that experience was also the same time I was at the Claremont School of Theology that we talked about as
mhm,
a PhD student. And of course, it's an interreligious context there, and was just a deeply transformative community for me to have professors and peers and the whole environment being full of religious and spiritual diversity. And that was such a beautiful community. And so I am so indebted to how that gave me more language and understanding for kind of the wisdom of the world and the ways that we could be attentive to it and be transformed by it. And
mhm.
so went to a Methodist seminary. There, I met a Disciples of Christ pastor who asked me to go to lunch. And when you're a poor graduate student and you get asked to go to lunch, you don't say no to lunch. And so I went to lunch and didn't know anything about the Disciples of Christ, but we was asked a very similar question: "What's your spiritual story? What tell me what brings you here?" And I
Yeah.
began to share and how my theology was evolving, how I was finding myself less and less um, able to be engaged in the same spiritual communities that I was in the past, but yet I felt still a deep fidelity to faith and the
Mhm,
life of God. And so they were said, well, you should think about the disciples. And I kept waiting for the moment that I would talk to someone and they would say, well, you're a little bit out there. I don't think you're going to fit here, because that was what I was used to experiencing. So up to that point of all the different faith communities that I had been a part of. And
yeah.
yet, the more people I talked to, they were like celebrating this way of being. They were encouraging it. They were promoting it. They were resourcing it. And
Yeah.
so I kind of eventually came to say, okay, maybe this is a new home. And so that happened about 6 years ago. And since then, I've just grown so much in my love for the disciples, particularly this emphasis on the expansive nature of the Lord's table, meaning, being that it's an open table that all of the world that can witness and be open to the fact of Jesus's lived experience being transformative in some way, in some deep
Mhm,
way. that
Mhm.
wants to familiarize with that the table is open for anybody of any walk of life and any condition and any background. And being able to be in a richly inclusive, radically inclusive practice, that has been really transformative for me. And then to kind of cap that off, the Fellowship of Fermi Ministries, which we discussed at the beginning, is kind of my spiritual context now, which was started by the Reverend Dr. Yvette Flunder, who is a queer African American woman, raised in a kind of Black Pentecostal church, but really promotes what she calls a radically inclusive gospel that is
Mhm.
affirming of the world's traditions, that is embodied, that's liberatory, that is prophetic, and that is engaged in solidarity with the world as it goes through transformation. And so I really attribute my love for spiritual communities and even the ways that can evolve through what the Fellowship of Fermi Ministries does. And so that's kind of my home congregation in Oakland, California, City of Refuge, United Church of Christ. And then what I get to do now at a Benedictine monastery in central Minnesota. And so as you can see, my journey has really been a kind of wide array of Christian context and
Yeah.
increasingly now more interfaith, which is what I'm really excited to get to encourage at the Collegeville Institute, but also in great support from the monks and the sisters here who are also really excited about that prospect as well.
Yeah. So tell me, if I may, the book, Trauma and Renewal. I mean, in from correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the impetus for that was having the motorcycle wreck.
Yeah,
Yeah. So do you feel comfortable talking about that? Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. The book Trauma and Renewal. I mean, it's what happened to me it was about 7 years ago now,
Hmm.
and it was about halfway through the doctoral program. I was actually on my way home, getting ready to celebrate the successful defense of my oral exams that day. And so I was coming back from Claremont School of Theology down to where I was living in Anaheim when the accident happened, and kind of detail what happened in the book. But briefly, it was riding on a motorcycle on the Highway 55 in Southern California, and a Ford F-150 truck. I wasn't really paying attention in their lane and was about to rear end the car in front of them. And so at the last minute, they swerved to the lane I was in, thinking that they were going to avoid an accident. And ended up, they didn't see me, just clipped the back of my bike. And so I went down about 30, 40 yards. And for all intents and purposes, could have easily lost my life in just the impact. But if not the impact from the fact that I was then laying in the middle of the freeway. And so I could hear kind of cars going past me and be very easy to not know if, people could even see me. And so it happened so fast, kind of in the blink of an eye, in
Hmm.
the snap of a finger, and you finally find yourself there laying there. And then you kind of look up to say, well, what even just happened? And then of course I saw the tremendous wounds to my lower body particularly. But what was really amazing about the experience, and I share some in the book, was not only that I survived, but part of how I survived and why I survived was because of the strangers who stopped and risked their life to support me in the middle of the accident. There was a recently immigrant couple from Egypt, a Muslim couple who came first to stop, a young couple to come to actually shield my body. They actually parked their car sideways in the lane so that cars couldn't go in that lane any longer. And then came out to the car and came out to me and supported me. And then there was a Jewish man from Lebanon who was on his motorcycle and stopped and came and also and did a tourniquet on my leg to kind of try to stop the bleeding, and was able to be there. So there was a Christian pastor left for dead in the side of a road, and two Muslims and a Jewish person came to provide cover and support for me. And I'm so grateful for their compassion, their courage, and their willingness to be receptive that day to life. And so I feel very transformed by that, and also in deep gratitude for that, because who knows what would have happened without that. And so that was the immediate response to the accident. And then I was hospitalized for 30 days and went through 7 surgeries. the fifth of which was meant to be 7 hours, a reconstructive surgery, but ended up being nearly 16. And in that 16-hour surgery, I endured a profound kind of mystical experience,
Mhm.
which is what really kind of the book, a lot of it centers on, as well as a few days after that experience, having kind of extended, ecstatic visionary moments kind of in and out for those days. And so I lived through this experience while I was in a program of studying interreligious mysticism and contemplative studies. And I was reading about all these ecstatic experiences and ways that people came to know the divine, both in kind of more, let's say, you know, warming moments, but then also in really difficult encounters and and I was reading about it, really wondering what that means and how that looks. And then in some strange way, it's like while I was studying that, then came the embodied encounter with some of these mysteries and I see kind of what happened to me as kind of a portal into some of that. And a lot of the teachings I was studying and then teachings that I was introduced to in the process of healing from that and the ongoing process of that were from the mystics, from the primarily Christian mystics, but there were others as well. And those really were kind of the lifeline for me in terms of continuing to be present to what was happening. And so I was unable to walk for the next 8 months, and that's when you talked about seeing me in the wheelchair. And we just had our second child, and so I remember our second child was taking first steps, and I remember thinking, "This is my moment to be inspired to learn how to walk with my child." And
Mhm.
so my second child was really kind of the source of inspiration and encouragement for me to try and to be courageous like they were. So that's just a little bit of the accident. I never intended to actually share much of it outside of personal friendships and kind of intimate community in terms of what I had experienced. Part of it because it's pretty uh, intense, and part of I think the healing journey is still learning how to process and digest and returning back to that again and again to find
Mhm.
your way through it. And so didn't really feel like I really even knew how or what to share in ways that could be supportive. I remember a chaplain friend of mine came to me after talking about this in the way that friends talk about things like this, and said to me, I really think you should write about this at some point of your life, and hopefully sooner than later. And I thought, write about this? I said, I can barely talk to you about this. What do you mean? What do you want me to write about this for? And I said, then there's enough literature out there on suffering and spiritual change and wisdom. And so what do I have to offer that?
Yeah.
And his response was very simple. And he just said, well, any gift that we receive is not just meant for us. And so if there's any gift that you received in this, how you can share that with the world is really important. He says, and I know you know that, but if you remember that it's not about you at all, it's about this gift that's for the world and how we can uh, give that and share that and deepen that together. That's what we're here for. And so very simple, very profound, and very much like, okay, fine. Maybe as a chaplain who works with people who suffer really difficult things, that maybe there's some way that this can be offered. So I give a shout out to him, Aleix Bonfil, who's in Catalonia, and the beautiful encouragement to begin to reflect on that. And so this book is kind of the first attempt at really publicly talking about some of this in a way that goes beyond just people who I know, people who I'm in kind of connection with.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I am especially intrigued by is that juxtaposition of extremely difficult situation, um, and the ecstatic sense of connection with the divine through a in your case, a near-death experience, and the following days, of that near-death experience. So that juxtaposition of what I interpret as like a greater sense of intimacy with the divine, um, and the proximity of that experience with this intensely difficult.
Hmm.
Yeah. Uh, Do you maybe this is a good time for you to read that passage.
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
happy to. I will share this short passage comes from the afterword of the book, which is entitled Wholeness is Not a One-Time Event. As I was stumbling my way through the writing process, I was reminded of all the times I had fallen again and again after my accident. There have been at least three separate occasions where I have slipped, lost balance, and reopened the wounds from the accident, causing me to go to the emergency room yet again for a new round of stitches. Each time I have fallen, I face the same sorts of intense feelings and questions, and consolations and support that were present in the initial trauma. And each time I was reminded again to return to the love that has carried me through. In each fall, I have learned that the process of transformation does not ultimately depend upon will, nor does it happen according to my timelines. And though it does not seem so at first, this is good news because the strength of our lives is not found in an ability to surpass what is difficult, but in our willingness to begin again, strengthening the whole as we walk one another back home.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Um, I'm laughing because I'm laughing at myself because I just God has made me with a soft heart, and that touched me deeply. So, um,
Mm, mm,
one of the uh,
mm,
one of the reasons that I resonate so deeply with that is my own struggle with falling. So I won't go into all of the symptoms and health challenges, but when but I have I guess you would say I have PODS, which is a um, postural, thing. You fall going up and down, changes in your um, blood pressure and heart rate and whatever. And so falling is just kind of a part of my life, you know. And when I get tired, um, I fall more, you know. Um, so if I have days that, I've been traveling or whatever, and I'm especially worn out, I might fall 5 times or 7 times in one day.
mm,
And then, get to the point where the forearms or the caustics or whatever are just like they just are existing in a state of being bruised, like some level of yeah.
mhm,
So when you write about that, like I personally connect with that experience of you wrote about the consolation and the questioning. Um, in that experience of willingness to begin again. And for me, it was a process of how do I be with this very difficult circumstance in a way that doesn't bring disconnection from the divine, but rather brings deeper,
mhm,
deeper connection with the
mhm,
divine. Um, so you shared. willingness to begin again, and you use the phrase return to the love.
Hmm.
But I wondered if there's anything else that you would want to share around your own process in terms of
Hmm.
making peace with the difficulty of such a traumatic experience and
Hmm.
the long road of recovery, which essentially is probably for the rest of your life, you're going to have some of the ramifications of that,
Right.
you know. So, um, could you speak a little bit more to how you are with difficulty as a way of bringing you closer to the divine as opposed to further
Yeah.
away? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that reflection and sharing just your own personal um, connection to the experiences of falling and the difficulties that that brings. And then like as you're leading us into a way of deepening a sense of awareness of the divine presence. And I was just shared by a friend the story of Bede Griffith's stroke and how at the end of his life before he passed, he went through this really terrible situation, but yet he described it afterwards as an encounter with the Holy Mother
Mm.
and how the mother was both cruel and devastating, and yet the mother was infinitely compassionate and merciful. And so there is this way of uh, this deepening into the mystery, the beyond all names, as you've called this podcast and these conversations, where um, it will refuse to be sanitized, and it will refuse to be even digestible to some extent. I mean, I think of all those who have been in the presence of this mystery and have been unable to speak, have been blinded, have been thrown off horses, have been wounded severely from these encounters. And so I think in some of the at least North American colonial apparatus that we've inherited of how religion's been co-opted, our images of even who the divine is need to be deeply transformed to a greater depth and an expansiveness that I think is very faithful to many traditions in their own encounters with this mystery. I'm thinking even of the Hindu narratives where the divine realities will do kind of things that we would find detestable to help promote awareness and are done for transformative intentions. And so I don't want to necessarily go down the road of is the divine behind my accident? Because me personally, I don't feel that the divine ever um, is pre-programming us or things in intentional ways, but I would say something like the divine presence is that which is this accompaniment and is this welling up of creative activity where all things are in connection. And I think it's that energy that wherever we find ourselves in life becomes a kind of a refuge, even if the refuge is discomforting to certain aspects of ourselves in certain moments. And because it's meant to bring us, like you say, not only into greater connection with divine, but all of life, right? And the divine in all of life. And so the trees and the stars and the moon and the sand and the different people who have lived and all the ways they have to live and navigate and survive. And so I would say something like when these things happen, another transformation is not just our theological transformation of kind of a deeper story of how the divine is present and moving in the midst of such tragic events, and also the need and reliance that we all have upon one another and life. And
Mm.
so, you mentioned like, when I was hospitalized and others like being in the position where, I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't go to the bathroom by myself. I couldn't do anything on my own. I wasn't able to read, because I was on drugs and because I couldn't, and so anything I wanted to do on my terms was taken away for that time. And so I was completely dependent on whoever would come in the room, the next nurse, the next, chaplain, the next, visitor, whatever, whoever would come and whatever they brought was what was going to, in some ways, impact my experience. And so that was very transformative for me to recognize how true it is that we all do really depend on one another. And
Mhm.
we are told lies that we can be self-sufficient or have our own like I said, our own will to kind of change things or move past things. But there's a deeper way of being that is open and available and interdependent, right? If we were to pull on the wisdom and within Buddhism, that helps us to recognize the not only the interconnectedness, but the ways we impact each other. And so then if that's true, then what I'm saying is the ways that we can begin to relate to these experiences is through communion with the divine and through and communion with one another. And when we're practicing that and open to that, now all of a sudden there are supports and like for my case, there was surprising strangers, whether the ones who were there at the side of the road or whether it was a nurse who would come and just have the look of the divine on their face and say, I recognize you're in horrible, unspeakable suffering. That was the feeling that I got from the person. I didn't say that, but that was the feeling. And yet, if there's anything I can do, even if it's the slightest move of the pillow to alleviate what it is you're experiencing, even just a little bit, like I would like to do that. I would like to give my life to that sense of love in a moment to be able to alleviate that suffering. And so that's where I feel the depth of the wisdom can come. And it's not necessarily about us providing it or doing it, but sometimes it's about us receiving that from unlikely sources. And so trauma transformation, in terms of when you're bringing the wisdom traditions into it, is really, I think, opening ourselves up to beyond individualistic responses, beyond monotheistic imagination, and to be able to really affirm the pluralism of life that is around us, that lives within us, that is impacting our experience. And so how we can dance with that, how we can be receptive to that, and how we can entrust our lives to that for the sake of the whole. I think that's the open question that faith asks of us, that our spiritual practices help to cultivate postures in us so that we can, I hope, be aware of that and participate in that when the moment comes to do so, right? And so that's my sense of the journey and going through that, how much we often, at least in the ways I was raised in other spiritual settings, they don't lift that up in the same way. Even though it's all there, it's
Yeah.
still been co-opted away into these kinds of individualized success stories or hero's journey, and that's why when I wrote this book, I really wanted to have the contributions from my primary caregivers, which happened to be my parents, but they were the ones whose home I stayed in, because I recognized we can only go insofar as we're all willing to go.
Right.
And so I was going on this healing journey and transforming things in some personal way, but that was bound up with how they were and what questions they were and where were they. And so it was this question of saying, this is beyond just what I experienced firsthand, but they experienced secondary trauma. They have their own questions that are unanswered and longings that are now coming up through this experience. And how can we be present to some of that in terms of what's happened? And so this really relational and communal approach to trauma transformation is what I want to lift up and say that it's very countercultural to what we often hear of in these kinds of discussions.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I don't know how familiar you are with Sufism, but the ontological categories in Sufism, there's the world, there's the material world, and then there's the more subtle world, which would then next be, like the world of the angels, the first unseen world, so to speak. And you progress, and the progression is, or the origination, whichever way you want to language it, is to the world of oneness, where there is only one, and it's often referred to as the world of unity. Um, and so Sufis they want to take the spiritual journey in order to realize the the intimacy with the beloved, capital B,
Hmm. Hmm.
in and to return to the world embodying that unity, carrying
Hmm.
the unity and the oneness. And so when you're talking about the transformation and the response and the renewal to trauma coming through this relational and communal approach,
Mm.
through interconnectedness and through interbeing, like to me, these are the threads that we see in Buddhism and we see in your experience and see in Sufism,
Hmm.
that there is this awareness that, as you said, is counterculture, but that there are aspects that are inviting us to think of ourselves in relation to our interconnectedness, in relation
Right.
to, in my tradition, there's the idea that all of humanity comes from one soul,
Mm.
you know.
Hmm.
So, I have a teacher who, even when you're looking at a figure that you feel very distant from or separate from, or you feel very different or separate from how they act in the world.
Hmm. Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, her approach is she always will pray saying us, saying we.
Yeah.
So it's not about them.
Right.
You know, there it's the negation of separation.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
it's it's not, so there's no like,
Right.
this is other, this person is other,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
us. And it may be that this person that we see in the material world as separate is
That's good.
manifesting this action in order
Yes.
that we manifest this action. So the
Right.
illusion of separation
Yeah.
is just illusion. Like you may
Sure.
see unbelief in order for for here to be belief.
Yeah.
Like so.
Well, I love that, and I know less about Sufism, and I hope to continue learning from you and others about this path because what you're describing in terms of this journey to a negation of separation or a sense of relationship to all is really so critical for the moment we're living in. Of course, with the genocide happening in Gaza and the violence in Sudan and the extraction of the world's resources for the greed of a few. There is in many ways a disconnect of this sense of the relationship to all, right? Because when we don't have that awareness, then we act in these oppressive ways. And so for me, that movement to justice, that movement to courage that is so important really is ground to me. I see it as grounded in this deep sense of being related to all. And I remember and I don't remember if I wrote about this particular piece in the book or not, but one of the moments in my vision, in my mystical experience was kind of this process of going to the world and eventually to all those that I thought were detestable and not worthy of love, and recognizing the divine love, loving all of reality at all times in all directions. And that was a complete difference of seeing and, of course, hearing the teachings of other wisdom teachers in this direction I was aware of, but actually having to come and reconcile with my own hypocrisy and blockages to experiencing that inside was part of the mystical experience through this accident. And that was deeply difficult to digest for certain
Yeah.
parts of my own experience,
Yeah.
and continue to be a growing edge of myself in terms of um, how to be open to what transformation might be there within myself and then ultimately in the world. And I want to just conclude this thread by saying my spiritual teacher, Raimon Panikar, interreligious mystic and philosopher and theologian, hit one of his favorite quotes to talk about the divine was from pulling in the Hermetic tradition by saying it's the center that's everywhere and the circumference that is nowhere. And
Mm.
so that feels very much my sense of how I want to be open to that and see if
Yeah.
I can actually live in alignment with that reality
Yeah.
of the center being everywhere. And so then the divine, this sense of, the capital B beloved, perhaps in the Sufi way of knowing it, the center of that is everywhere. And so there's not one place I can go definitively to say it's there and nowhere else, but that center is absolutely everywhere. And so, so then it's a growing edge forever of being engaged with that center to be transformed and then continuing to allow the center to deepen in all directions.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you are seeking to embody that the center is everywhere in that intersection between spirituality and faith and social justice, in that intersection between, you mentioned earlier when you were talking about interconnections, the intersection of spirituality and uh, relationality to the creation, including to plants and animals and, and
Yep.
not only just our brothers and sisters in humanity, but all of the created world. So, so I also want to just go back to the idea that you shared in your spiritual story of monastic yearning.
Mm,
And I wonder if you're talking about this transformational experience and reconciling what I would language as like a unifying love or an experience of of the divine as one love, one pervasive love that is everywhere. Uh,
hmm
how has this experience
hmm
transformed your relationship to that monastic yearning and how you embody that in
hmm
your
Yeah, so again, the monastic yearning that I like, and I really appreciate you bringing that piece back up because it's kind of a thread that I'm very curious about how that exists within myself,
yeah.
and then and how that exists within others, you know. And for me, and now I'll pull on another very important spiritual teacher to me, Howard Thurman, who was not a monastic, but he was a huge source of a kind of spiritual depth to the civil rights, of course, and then to the path of nonviolence. And of course, he went to India, influenced by Gandhi and other Hindu teachers, about how to then now see that within Christianity and the teachings of Jesus, and to
Mhm.
bring that out. But for him, you know, he called the spirituality of Jesus a technique of survival for the oppressed and a
Mhm.
way of enduring and persisting and ultimately transforming life, even in the midst of oppressive circumstance. And he saw Jesus' spirituality particularly as a
Mhm.
path for this. And so for me, the call to be on that path of survival, to be on that path of transformation, to be on that path of nonviolence is going
Mhm.
to require us to let go of all the habits and patterns and ways of violence or oppression that we've inherited, that we've socialized, that we've habituated into our ways of being, you know, all the way down to the impulse we have to do something rather than to be with something.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so for me, that monastic yearning is the tradition present in many traditions, not all of them, of course, but if we were to kind of universalize this dimension, and again, this is borrowing on and building on Panikar's work of the monastic archetype, but it's this willingness to renounce everything that is less than what is most important, and to
Mhm.
be on a pursuit of that which is vital. And for me, what is vital is that relationality, is that creative energy that is not action for action's sake. It's creativity so that harmony, so that fullness, so that affirmation of all that is acknowledged and celebrated and enriched. And so forever for me, the monastic yearning is how can I live in such a way that this one thing, this most important thing, which I think is beyond naming even, I don't even want to name it, but whatever that most important thing is, that
Mhm.
I am listening to it, that I'm yielding to it, that it is continuing to speak through me, that my life might be transparent for that mystery, and
Yeah.
so that it can reverberate and call forth that sense of if I was to call something, I would just say life, capital L, but so that life would then echo and be transformed and continue forth in creative, beautiful ways in everything. And so that's a deep calling, and I fail miserably at it. but I'm grateful for all the kinds of wonderful beings who also sense that. And I'll leave with the story saying that I was at the final vows of one of the brothers here in the monastic community for feast day this last few weeks ago, the feast day of Saint Benedict. And I was just in tears for most of the service. And I'd never been to a final solemn vow event or ceremony ritual in this community. And to see that there was somebody in this world who is willing to make vows to say, I will give my life to what is most essential, and I'm not going to pursue many other things that are possible and fine to pursue, but I'm going to devote myself to this in community, in this place, in this moment, for the purpose of the divine and for this world. It really was incredible to witness that, wow, there are people doing this. And so for me, it says, well, I'm not going to be a monk in this way, but maybe there's something of this dimension that I can learn from and continue to cultivate and deepen in my own experience. And that is a beautiful gift to me to be able to witness that happening in this particular way. And then to ask, how could this sense of yearning, how can we nurture it more in one another? And what are the conditions required so that we can continue to invite one another to it as well? And that's what we're doing here at the Collegeville Institute. And that's what I feel is at the heart of really what we are needing in the world right now, which is less of good research, which is great. It's less of great quote unquote leaders, which would also be great. But it is this sense of being connected to what is most vital for all of us to experience that yet again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, may this conversation be an invitation and an inspiration to whether we label that great mystery as the unifying love or light, um, or that which we hold most holy or most sacred, or as you said, that was most vital. So may this conversation and what you've shared and our dialogue be an invitation and inspiration to say yes over and over again, moment after moment in our daily life to that which is most vital. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. Thank you to all listeners for joining us on Beyond Names. Before we go, if you would just take one breath and reflect for just a moment on anything that stays with you from this conversation. May something you heard today help you reconnect with the light in your own heart. May you grow in compassion, in courage, in clarity. May you find your way again home. May you find your way home again and again, back home to yourself, back home to the divine, back home to that which you hold as most vital, however you name it. If today's conversation spoke to you, I'd like for you to share it or leave a review or reach out. Until next time, may you be light. May you carry light. May you consciously participate in growing your light, and may you share your light. Peace be with you.